Yeah, really.
You got the wrong one.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here again, and I wanna let you know ahead of time. I have never had an original thought. I don't know about you guys, but I have never had an original thought. And I want to talk to you about something that was suggested to me probably 40 years ago. And I will tell you the source, and you may guffaw, but remember the colloquialism that even blind squirrels occasionally find nuts. So I wanna, yeah. I've mentioned to you in private conversations, not in front of the camera, that I did not grow up in the United States. I grew up on Indian reservations, and the Native Americans that I spent my time with are definitely not Americans. They are American citizens, of course, but they do not share the culture of the vast majority of Americans. I was born in the Holy Land, Wheeler, Texas, and my dad was one of the large number of veterans who got a college degree on the GI Bill. Here was the dilemma. World War II pulled the United States out of the Great Depression. And all during World War II, the federal government was concerned about what would happen when all of these guys in uniform were discharged and they would head back into the economy. There would be such a glut of workers without jobs, and there would be a displacement of women who had held previously male-only jobs that would be pushed out. And so there would be massive unemployment, and there was a great risk of another depression, a recession anyway. And so the federal government came up with a brilliant idea of approaching all of the institutions of higher learning around the United States. This is documented. And they wanted to create a GI Bill to make it possible for a higher percentage of Americans to go to college than had ever gone to college before. And they talked to not only individual private universities, but state schools and school systems around the United States. And in order for these GIs to be able to survive college, they were, just to put it in blunt terms, they were approached with a request that they dumb down their curriculum. Okay. The University of California system said absolutely no. The California state system said absolutely yes. The Ivy League schools said absolutely no. But most of the other schools across the United States said yes. It used to be in the year 1900, for example, that if you graduated from the University of Nebraska with a degree in agriculture, you had 4 years of Latin. And now, and I'm a graduate of Oregon State University. Oregon State University used to be a really top flight school of engineering. And the School of Engineering was a much broader and a much deeper curriculum before World War II than it was afterwards. But essentially, these tech schools became trade schools. In other words, what they would do is they would stay away from a commitment to the liberal arts, which every educated person before World War II had real exposure to the liberal arts. And so the curriculum around the world was really dumbed down. And, and the slide has continued. It used to be when you graduated from an inner city Washington, D.C. high school, you had 2 years of 2 different languages. So the typical inner city ghetto kid in Washington, D.C. would graduate with 2 years of Spanish, 2 years of Latin, or 2 years of Latin, 2 years of French, something like that. And nothing approached that level of education is going on in the United States. And so the culture that I grew up in was way, way, way far removed. I grew up with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. And I was initially the only white kid in the school, and they never heard of Marcus de Queensberry. The rules were very different. It is laughable today that organized, federally recognized Indian tribes, Indian nations in the United States, will frequently elect their chief, and they will elect a woman. Guys, that is so astonishingly laughable. That is so far removed from the culture of Native Americans up through the mid-1950s. Feminists today talk about the patriarchy. Honey, you never seen a patriarchy like among the Native American tribes. And so I remember one time, and just to give you a little bit of background in it, I remember one time at the Fort Totten Indian Reservation, which was the last Indian reservation where they had occupying troops on the reservation, which is where I was in school. Now they didn't have soldiers when I was there, but it was the last reservation to have occupying forces. And there was a fight, and there was bitter acrimony between different tribes. And the United States government, of course, put different tribes on the same reservation. Tribes that for centuries had bitter warfare against each other. The United States said, well, all Indians are alike, so let's just put them on the same reservation. So they had Sioux and Chippewas on the same reservation. The Sioux and Chippewas hated each other's guts. And so there's a fight going on, and of course I'm watching. I'm one of the 100 or so kids watching these guys really duke it out, man. They are really fighting. And one kid falls down. He gets knocked down by a guy, and somebody rushes from the crowd and kicks this guy right in the face with his shoe. His older brother. His older brother. You say, well, what in the world was that? Now, understand, no Marcus de Queensberry, no love thy brother kind of stuff in that culture. His older brother was finishing him off. And he was finishing him off because he went down. And that's what you do when somebody goes down, you finish him off. And we live in a different culture. The last trip that I had, and another illustration of this, the last trip that Mike and I and several others made to Israel, we were in Jerusalem on the last day of Ramadan. I wanted to take them into the Dome of the Rock, but because it was the last day of Ramadan, no non-Muslims were allowed. And so we're wandering around that elevated area on the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock is, and we went over to the eastern side, and we heard in the background, and somebody said, somebody's saying Allahu Akbar, and another one of our group said, no, he's not, and I said, yes, he is. And so there was probably a 50 or 60-year-old mullah who was walking along wearing his nightshirt, and he looked totally bored. He had a beard somewhat more shaggy than mine, and he was walking along and looking around and bored. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The response of the young men was utterly and completely different. They were frothing at the mouth. I mean, this was Pavlov's dogs, man, and the bell was ringing. And so they're drooling, and he's getting them jacked up. It's the last day of Ramadan, and quickly a crowd gathered, and the Israeli religious police came up, and they're big guys, men and women, really big. They had riot gear on. They had shields hanging. They had nightsticks, but not out. They were carrying helmets. So it was a pre-riot situation. They were mingling among the crowd, but they didn't expect any violence at that point. And then and this is the point, this is the thing I wanted to illustrate. We saw a slender young Muslim woman dressed in black attire, hijab and all that. And she walked across the surface there, the pavement, and through the crowd. She walked very quickly up to a young Israeli religious cop. He's probably 6'2", probably weighed 190, 200 pounds. This kid was put together. And she came at him from about 7 o'clock, and she just gave him a straight right hand to the jaw. Okay, now the reaction of the Israeli cop is something that I do not believe any American police officer would have done. I don't believe any American soldier would have done this unless he had been in the combat area for a while and had learned. But what most Americans would do is they would turn, immediately spot that it's a female, and try to diffuse the situation and all that. But what the Israeli soldier did, because he's from a different culture, he's not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant type guy, okay? He gets it in the face, and he turns, and he delivers a Mike Tyson shot to her face, and he dropped her like a sack of potatoes. And when I saw that, I thought that I can't imagine an American law enforcement officer reacting that quickly and that forcefully to a female, okay? Because it's a different world there. When I grew up on the Indian reservations, and I lived on reservations until I graduated from high school, the culture was different. There was none of this gentlemanly behavior, and when you're walking on the sidewalk, you walk curbside, your woman walks closer to the building. That just simply, that kind of conduct among Native Americans was unknown. To reach out and to help your woman climb the stairs or pass through that just wasn't done. There was very much a hierarchy in the culture. And imagine what it must have been like around the world, a pre-Christian era, okay? Imagine, let's say you are a Dane or you are a Swede in the pre-Christian era, and you have come back from a Viking, all right? And you come into your home and you tell your woman, I'm hungry. And she says, get it yourself. Well, first of all, she wouldn't say that. See, well, why wouldn't she say that? Because she doesn't want to get smacked down by her husband, that's why. Because in that case, what her husband would do, he would severely beat her, okay? Plains Indians coming back from a hunting party or a raiding party, coming back into their teepees and tell their women, I'm hungry. Well, get it yourself. They're not going to say that because they don't want this to happen to them, okay? And it was a pre-Christian era. The relationship between men and women was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, because the relationship of men to women was not based upon morality, it was not based upon ethics, it was not based upon scripture, it was based upon who's bigger, who's stronger, who's more aggressive, okay? And guys are bigger, typically, stronger, typically, almost always more aggressive, and in a family unit or in a clan, it's the big guys, the loud guys, the tough guys who are the boss, and everybody else toes the line. And if you don't toe the line, you get thrashed. I'm sorry, that's just reality. That's the way the world is. Has it reached you yet that I despise feminism? Because they're so out of touch with reality. I have over the last couple of years read a number of feminist books in which they try to posit that back in the day there were matriarchal dominated cultures, and there have been and there exist in some places matriarchies. In recent times, there are certain places in the world where they have a matriarchal culture, but they tend to be in somewhat more technologically advanced. Back in the day, in Polynesia and in some parts of West Africa, they were somewhat matriarchal, but that's because they didn't have to hunt and they didn't have to farm to survive, okay? The food was readily available, and sometimes it would become a matriarchal culture. But wherever you had fighting, wherever you had warfare, wherever you had conflict, you have a patriarchal society. And some people live in the world of ought to be. And we who believe the Bible, we should really live in the world of is, okay? This is the universe we live. It is this way, not it ought to be this way. This is the way it is. And so the human race from the fall has found itself in a situation where there are certain people in the society who occupy positions of unassailable authority. I'm not going to suggest that their authority was legitimately held or legitimately wielded, but it was authority and it was unassailable, okay? What do you say to a despotic ruler? You don't say anything. You keep your mouth shut, okay? We know that when Esther came into the throne room of Ahasuerus, she was putting her life on the line, because had he not held that scepter toward her, within seconds her head would have been taken off, because you simply don't come into that room unbidden. You don't do anything that would in any way violate the authority of that ruler. And if we don't understand that, we don't realize the peril that Esther was in, and the urgency with which Mordecai urged her to go do this, and we don't appreciate it. So we find that whether it be in a culture where they have a ruler, like a king, like an emperor, or in a situation where you have slavery, and we know slavery has been worldwide since the fall, okay? And the master-slave relationship, the master occupies a position of unassailable authority. Absolutely, what he says and what he does cannot be questioned by his slaves. It's just not possible. In addition to that, you have the relationships of the family, marriage, as I've illustrated. Nowadays, we actually have marriages in which guys cannot imagine having a relationship with their wife where she does what he tells her to do. That's how much feminism has usurped or weakened or undermined the authority wielded by men due to their size, due to their aggressiveness, things like that, and survivability. And it was in a woman's best interest to be married to that kind of guy, because you need to be married to the big dog. The big dog's going to protect you. He's going to look out for you. He's going to be ferocious in his protection of you. And you certainly don't want to be married to somebody who's amenable, somebody you can push around, somebody that you can snarl at, somebody that you can backtalk to, because that's not a guy who has any strength, and he's not going to be able to protect you in an uncivilized situation. So what happens when God begins dealing with people, and these people that God is dealing with, and they're exposed to God's word, and from the Christian era, the beginning of the Christian era, the gospel starts penetrating these regions. What effect does it have? For example, when they start preaching the gospel to these different nations, tongues, kindreds, and tribes, does the gospel change the hierarchy that existed before the gospel got there? No, it does not. No, it does not. I'm of the opinion that the Bible teaches emphatically the functional hierarchy in the home is the husband is the leader and the wife is his helpmeet, and they rule over and guide the children. It's equal in the sight of God. It is a functional hierarchy, okay? And what the gospel did, when the gospel was introduced to a nation or to a tribe, it did not disrupt the hierarchy, it simply redefined it, okay? You are not the leader because you're bigger. You're not the leader because you're stronger. You're not the leader because you're smarter. You're not the leader because you're more aggressive. You're the leader because God decided you were. And your leadership of her is not based on the fact that you're bigger, stronger, meaner, less temperate than she is. It's based upon the fact that you and she are of one flesh, and you're to love her with a sacrificial, protecting love. But it didn't alter the hierarchy as far as the relationship. It simply redefined what it was. So what happens if you're a Christian and you live in a country where there's no freedom? What happens if you're a Christian and you're married to a guy and he's not a believer? What happens if you are a Christian and you are a slave that's owned by a guy who has the absolute power of life and death over you? Okay? God has given to us, I believe, the means of dealing with that kind of a situation. Now let me divulge to you where I got it. Anybody here ever heard of Bill Gothard? So, apologies, but I think he's onto something. There is a way that God has provided us for dealing with somebody who occupies a position of unassailable authority over us. Whether it's a government employee, a police officer, for a woman, a husband, for a child, a parent, for an employee, a boss, and that is a biblical appeal. And what I'd like to share with you are some of the features of a biblical appeal, because I believe God has given us the principles for dealing with people who occupy positions of authority over us, and we can do so without threatening their position, so that they are aware that we are not threatening their position. We're not attempting to undermine them, okay? And first, for a biblical appeal, these are the requirements for you to voice to someone who occupies a position of unassailable authority over you. These are the requirements for voicing that appeal to that individual. First of all, you have to have a right understanding . A right standing with that individual. Secondly, you have to have a right basis for the appeal. 3, there has to be a right timing for the appeal. 4th, there has to be a right conveying of information in the appeal. 5, there has to be a right attitude when making the appeal and when hearing the response to your appeal. There has to be right wording, a word word fitly spoken. And then there has to be a right response. I first got exposed to this more than 40 years ago. And I set it aside for decades. And then I would revisit as I'm reading through the Bible and studying the Bible, and I'm watching, studying about Abigail's appeal to David, Daniel's appeal to the eunuch, Nathan and Bathsheba's appeal to David in his old age, these kinds of things. And I found out that blind squirrel found a nut. That blind squirrel found a nut. Okay? Now let me share with you what I think an appeal is. And I think this is crucial. A biblical appeal to someone is not an attempt to persuade someone to change his mind. When you try to persuade someone to change his mind, you are, whether intentionally or unintentionally, whether actually or via insinuation, you are indicating to that person that his decision was stupid and it was wrong and it was dumb. You need to change your mind because your original decision was stupid. You need to change your mind because your original decision was wrong. You need to change your mind because your original decision was erroneous. Okay. So that's not what a biblical appeal seeks to do. A biblical appeal is a request that someone consider making a new decision based on new considerations. You want to request that he consider making a new decision based upon new to him, maybe not fully aware of these considerations when the initial, maybe new information has come to light, whatever, okay? New considerations, okay? So let me just share with you some things that I think will be persuasive. So what I'm doing is I'm seeking to persuade you not to change your mind about biblical appeals, but to consider making a new decision about biblical appeals. And let me just share with you some of the experiences that I've had. You are fully capable of examining the appeal that Abigail made to David when David, as this warlord, hinted at Nabal's servant that he should be rewarded in some way for providing protection against marauders and raiders of his flock. And Nabal was a profoundly foolish man, and not only did he refuse to do what was culturally appropriate, but he actually insulted David to David's man. A warlord like David, especially when he's got like these 33 mighty men, when he's got these fighters, he's not the dictator of that group. He has to win their allegiance, and he has to maintain their allegiance. And these guys are not going to tolerate their leader allowing someone to insult him that way. They're not going to allow that. David cannot maintain leadership of his men if he allows this fool to get away with that. And so he's determined, I'm going to take this guy out. Well, Abigail finds out about that, okay? And she makes really a classic appeal that is really worth studying, and tremendously, she very much impressed David. So he ended up marrying her after her husband was dead. But if you look at it closely, you will see that Abigail's appeal was wrong, because who should her initial appeal have been directed to? Her husband. She didn't make an appeal to her husband. She made an appeal to the guy that was going to kill her husband. She should have made her initial appeal to her husband. Who knows what would happen or however it would have turned out. But I believe that it is incumbent upon a guy who marries a woman to immediately set out, because it's his job to disciple her. It's your job to disciple your wife. You're to be the spiritual leader. You're to teach her the Word of God. You are to guide her in how she is to relate to you. And you're to make decisions on behalf of the family. Now understand, I am a strong advocate of a guy, when he makes decisions that affect the family, he's foolish if he doesn't seek the counsel of his wife. But initially, when a guy marries a woman, he may not really know how suitable and how valuable her wisdom and her input is initially. And he may end up making a decision based upon the recommendation of this friend or that guy or that family member. And she thinks, oh my goodness, my husband, I love him so much, but what a dumb decision. What a dumb decision. And it is inappropriate for her to then approach him and say, excuse me, you made a dumb decision without even talking to me. He should train her how to make an appeal to him so that she can request that he consider a new decision based upon new information, thereby strengthening his position, thereby encouraging him. And if he teaches her how to do that, and they in turn train their children how to do that, it helps everybody, okay? We see Ruth's appeal to Boaz. She was guided by her mother-in-law, her former mother-in-law, Naomi, into making an appeal. And it worked out well. It worked out well. As I mentioned, Bathsheba's appeal to David when he was old. Remember, David was very old, very feeble. He had previously indicated that it was God's will for Solomon to succeed him as the king. But then we have some things going on with some of Solomon's older brothers that were rocking the boat, and they were trying to usurp the throne. And so Nathan approaches Bathsheba, who seems to have been a very different woman than she was with her first encounter with David, because Nathan makes a recommendation to her, and the two of them collaborate. Some people would say they conspire. I don't think it's a conspiracy to enable someone to do what they've previously indicated was God's will for their life. That's not manipulation. And so they planned a strategy. You know, how Bathsheba approached David, and then Nathan comes in at the right time and supports her, and the result is an appeal made to David that he responded to and acceded to, and all turned out well. We see Esther's appeal to her husband Ahasuerus, the king of Persia. She was guided by her uncle Mordecai, and she pulled it off, and it worked well. To have a right, let me give you a personal illustration. The first time I ever suggested this to someone, it was when a young woman in our church who was married to a young man in our church, they had just graduated from Cal State Fullerton. They were both electrical engineers, and he was not a U.S. citizen. He was from the Middle East. He grew up in Iran. He was an Armenian guy who grew up in Iran. So his understanding of the relationship between husbands and wives was vastly different than what his wife expected their relationship to be like, her being an American, okay? And so she came to me one day and she said, Pastor, I got a serious problem. And I said, what's the problem? She said, you know, now that I've had our son, I very, very strongly want to raise this boy. I want to raise him. I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And my husband and I, we have college debts, and it's a bit of a struggle. And he's told me, no, you're going to work. You're going to work. And she said, Pastor, I do not want my mother-in-law raising my son. I cannot have my mom raising my son, and I have no confidence that anybody that I hire will do for my son what I can do for my son. You know, the importance of talking, the importance of loving, the importance of correcting, the importance of setting boundaries, teaching that kid the meaning of the word no, so that you can both save his life and persuade him he's not the center of the universe. Okay. And so I reached back into my memory and said, I have a recommendation for you to consider. And I said, let me just go through some things with you. Do you have a good relationship with your husband? Does he think you have a good relationship with him? And she said, yeah. I said, you get along well and all that kind of stuff? And she said, yeah. And he understands that you accept his role as leader in the relationship? She said, oh, no question about it. Whether he's a Christian or not, it would be that way, because he's an Armenian from Iran. Yes, he's going to be in charge. Okay. And I said, now, the appeal that I'm going to recommend that you make, is there a good scriptural basis for it? She said, I believe there is. I want to be the mother to my son. And I said, that sounds good to me. I said, now let's go for right timing, okay? May I suggest that you do not talk to him as soon as he walks through the door, before he has a chance to go to the bathroom, before he has a chance to sit down, before he has a chance to read the newspaper? Can you hold off on that kind of stuff and let him settle into a state of mind where he's ready to talk, where he's ready to interact, where he doesn't feel like you're just jumping on him as soon as he gets home? She said, yeah, I can do that. He doesn't like for me to do anything for 30 minutes when he gets home. Just let me sit down, let me unwind, let me decompress, let me relax, and then, honey, I'm yours. And I said, yeah, that's right timing. You don't want to do that. You don't want to inform the pastor that you're planning on leaving the church 3 minutes before it's time for the Sunday morning sermon to start. Okay. How many of you guys have had that, right? Right timing. Number 4, the right information. I said you need to convey the truth to him, and you need to convey the good, the bad, and the ugly. In other words, the information that you're conveying to him in the hopes that he will consider and then make a new decision based upon new information. Do not withhold from him the obvious financial consequences of you not working. Yeah, it'll be harder for us financially. Yes, it will be tougher. The way I will deal with that is, I'll become a coupon clipping queen. I will be among the most efficient people you've ever known when it comes to handling, grocery money and stuff like that. I will organize. I will do all kinds of things, and you got to convey the right information to him. And number 5, it has to be the right attitude. You're not you need to not stand in front of him, put your hands on your hips, and say, "Well, I'm his mother." In the United States of America, we have an astonishing number of women who exercise absolute veto power over their husbands with regarding the welfare of the children. And that lets you know who's really in charge. And they will call their husbands on it, and their husbands will balk, and they will capitulate, and that's just not right, because wives don't have that kind of veto authority over their husbands when it comes to raising children. All right. And the attitude should not be one of demanding and commanding. The attitude should be one of, with humility, requesting, right? And you request in such a way that the guy actually feels like he has the option of saying yes or no. When you go to your boss, there shouldn't be veiled threats associated with your appeal to your boss. A wife should not, and by the way, guys, as pastors, we know, oh my goodness, do women exercise sexual leverage over their husbands in the United States. There's a withholding of favors and a withholding of affection And it's absolutely terrible. It's profoundly destructive. And so a woman does that and 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 does that, and her husband cheats on her. His cheating is inexcusable. Let me get that clear. It is inexcusable. Okay? And it is understandable. Understandable, but inexcusable. And she could have spared him those temptations had she not chosen to exercise sexual leverage over him by withholding favors. Okay? So there needs to be the right attitude, and then there needs to be the right wording. You know, when in our pastoral counseling we have people, and you'll frequently hear, well, she always, and he always, and he never, and she never, and those kind of words, they're not designed to produce good effect. They're designed to, those are wall building words, not tearing down obstacle words. And words should be properly understood as ways of negotiating the obstacles and barriers in the mind of the other person. So you can get this way and around, and you want to get to his decision-making place without trying to knock down the barriers and the obstacles that he's erected in his mind or she's erected in her mind. And then there needs to be the right response. I have seen people over the course of time who have used their spouse's appeal to them, and they have very intentionally chosen to test them. So my wife comes to me with an appeal, and we have a right standing and the right basis and the right timing, the right information, the right attitude and the right wording, and I'm going to say no. And I'm going to say no to test her to find out if she really has this. Okay, now, she's right. I should make a new decision based upon new information. It would be better for the family. It would be better for our child. It would be better for our marriage. And I'm going to say no. And you say, well, why do you say no? Because you can. And a person who's making an appeal should expect that person might just say no just to show that they can. And they might say no just to discern whether or not the right attitude is really there. And the person making the appeal really is giving them a choice. And it's not veiled, and there's not an underlying threat and a lack of cooperation from this point forward, so that you don't really have freedom in your options. And so a person here's a strategy. I've always been keen on things military, and I think a husband ought to function like a general, and every great general is willing to lose a battle to win the war. You want to win the war. The war is the important thing, and you go long term. So I think a wife should be taught the same thing. She ought to be willing. She ought to be willing to lose her appeal this time, so that she can gain the confidence of her husband over the course of their marriage from now on. And so she may realize, I'm going to make an appeal to him, and he may, we haven't been married very long, I've not made an appeal to him before, he may not allow me to make an appeal just to check my reaction to him, just to test me. You say, well, does a husband have the right to do that? It's not a question of whether he has a right to do that. Husbands will on occasion do that. And a wife needs to live in the universe of is, not in the universe of ought to be. She needs to realize she's married to a human being, and he may do that. If she has failed to convince him of her willingness to follow his leadership, he may use this as an opportunity to test her. She needs to pass this test. because a more important appeal may be on the horizon that she doesn't know about, and she really needs for him to make a new decision on that one. She kind of needs him to make a new decision on this one in this situation. And so this young woman said, okay, I'll do that. And I said, my recommendation would be you write it down. Collect your thoughts, write them down. This doesn't have to be an immediate thing. He's letting you know that in the next month or so he wants you to hit the workforce. But he knows that right now he wants you at home with your son. I said, so you've got time. You don't always have time when constructing an appeal, but she had time. And so she wrote it down. Being an engineer, she had well-ordered, logical, rational, reasonable. She was able, bullet points and all that kind of thing. And then she asked him one evening, oh, would we have time to talk? And he said, yes. And she said, when would be a good time for us to have an important discussion? And he says, well, why don't we wait until we put our son to bed? Once we put him to bed, then we can talk for however long. And she said, okay. And of course, she's praying about this. And she had planned putting together her right information to convey it to him the right way. And she showed me the letter that she had written out to him, that she was going to relate to him and then hand to him and then await his decision. And she basically conveyed to him, I love you. I am committed to following you. I am committed to being the best wife for you that I can be by the grace of God. I am committed to being the best mother to our son that I can be by the grace of God. And it's my commitment to being the best mother that I can be that is the reason why I'm making this appeal to you. I believe that I am the most qualified person you know to raise your son. I believe that I'm more qualified than my mother. I believe that I'm more qualified than your mother. And neither one of their mothers were Christians, but even if they were. And she set forth the ideals that she wanted to inculcate into their son. I want my son to admire his father. I want my son to respect his father. I want my son to honor his father. I want my son to obey his father. And it will be the significant portion of my efforts as a mother is to inculcate these values into our son, so that he will grow up to be a man like his father. And she had it written down, so she related it to him verbally, and she asked him, would you please prayerfully consider my request? And he said, and she didn't press him for a right now decision, and he said yes. And she said, she handed it to him, and it was so that he could review what she had said, and so that he wouldn't forget anything that she said. And he came back the next evening, after he went to work the next day, came back the next evening, and he said, I've given your request some thought, and I know that it will be far more difficult for us financially. I know that I'm going to have to work a lot more hours in order for us to make it, pay off our college loans and things like that. He said, but I've reached a decision. I insist that you stay home. I do not want you in the workforce. I want you home with our son, and I want you home with what future children God gives to us, because I can't imagine anyone taking better care of my son than you. I don't think anyone is as committed. I don't think anyone is as capable. I don't think anyone has access to God's grace in her life to acquire the wisdom to do that. And so, yes, that's what I want. And so that was the first time I ever suggested to someone how to make a biblical appeal. And every single, and I've been in the ministry now for 45 years. I don't remember how many times that I've specifically urged this upon people, whether it be a guy and his boss, whether it be, I've employed this with government people who have come to visit me, whether it be a fire marshal or some, mayor of the city, those kinds of things, chief of police on occasion. But I have no recollection of anyone in my ministry. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I don't recollect anyone that I have challenged to make use of this appeal, not to change somebody's mind, but to request that they make a new decision based upon new or not previously considered information. And I think so far I'm batting 1,000. Or it seems as though God is honoring this principle of humility in a person's life, where you're not seeking to undermine them, you're not seeking to thwart them in any way. I believe that this appeal process was the original win-win negotiation. It's the original one. I mean, thousands of years older than recent negotiators will say, you got to have a win-win. This was a win-win. If you cannot make an appeal that is based upon the best interests of the person you're making the appeal to, you have no right to make it. She wanted this so that she could be the best wife to her husband, and he would be most pleased with the way his son was being raised. So her appeal was basically for him, and it was also for her. Now consider also the fact that prayer to God is a specialized form of appeal, is it not? We have a right standing with God based upon our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. We're directed to boldly approach the throne of grace. Our prayers have to have the right basis. And the great thing about the ministry of the Holy Spirit is he's going to edit the wording as he sees fit. Amen? So the wording will, by the time it reaches the throne room, it's going to be the right prayer, okay? Well, the right timing for a Christian is any time, right? Whether it's Noah, the cupbearer to the king, or at night before you pillow your head, or the morning after you wake up. And here's the one I have a problem with. You know how new Christians are always telling God stuff? Well, you know how Bill is always doing this, you know how Jack is always doing that. God doesn't need to know that. He already knows that. He already has the right information. We should just ask God. We don't need to inform him, especially in public prayer. I think pastors, I think it is incumbent upon us to teach people how to pray in public. And from the beginning of their Christian life, we need to let them know that we see it as part of our pastoral duty is to coach you so that you can become a more effective prayer in public. And one of the things that people do is they use an address of God as punctuation. Well, dear God, Lord, how I went to the store, Lord, and how I was looking for milk, Lord, and enough with the Lord. The Lord is not a comma. He's not punctuation, okay? He knows who you're talking to. And in addition to that, we want to inform him of things he already knows. And I think it sets a bad example, and I think pastors ought to gently coach people so that they can be more effective prayer warriors. And of course, the right attitude, we approach the throne of grace with humility. The right wording, and I think the right wording is not these and thous. Respectful, reverent, but not Middle English, okay? And then a right response. However God chooses to decide to answer our prayers, yes, no, or not yet, we ought to be profoundly thankful that we have the ability to approach the throne of grace, and that we have a guaranteed audience with God, which is not something that unsaved people have. They don't have a guaranteed audience with God. We do. And we are at the and This is how I envision it in my mind. When we approach the throne of grace, we are literally rushing past the seraphim who are guarding the throne of God. And we are intimate with the Father as we're praying to Him. And the seraphim, they're behind us. We're closer to our Father than they are. And it's wonderful to be able to pray. But our prayer is a specialized form of appeal. When we pray to God, we should ask for something that is more favorable to Him than for us. Because our goal, our life, our reason for existing is to glorify God. And so what we pray for should ultimately be for an improvement in our means, in our capability, in our usefulness in glorifying God. And exalting the Savior and making Christ's name known among the nations. And so I'm of the opinion that if a pastor trained his men to train their wives, and then to train so that those families would then train their children, this is the pressure release valve for someone who finds himself subordinate to someone. Well, I just can never talk to my dad. He never listens to me. None. If his father had shown him how to do this and let him know, son, every time you want to sit down with me and appeal to me, I promise you before God, I will listen to what you have to say. And so that boy can get up and walk away from that with the understanding, my dad may not choose to make a new decision based upon new information, but he heard me out. He heard me out. A wife can get up and say, I don't know whether my husband will respond to my request. Never a demand, never a command, not from a wife. Never a command, never a demand, not from a wife. Okay. If she's demanding and commanding, she's a feminist. I'm sorry, she's a feminist. But if she can get up from that conversation, he heard me out. And now I'm going to spend time in prayer, praying that God will work in his heart and that he will make a decision which I believe is the best decision for him as well as for me and our family. Okay. You may be talking to a police officer. You don't have time to make an appeal. You may be in front of a judge. You may be in front of a city zoning committee. It may be your boss. But I believe that God has given us the means. And when this is done the right way, prayerfully, with humility, leaving the results to God, obviously leaving the results to God, then we can influence people without undermining their position. And isn't God's plan for us to be influencers, salt and light? And if we influence someone and they make a new decision and it turns out that it was best for them as well as good for us, then we have an inroad for dealing with that person again in the future. And we do it again and again and again, and this is the way we can build relationships with other people and strengthen them and reinforce them, and they know that we're an ally, we're not an enemy, we're not trying to hurt them, we're not trying to undermine them. And you insist that your children deal with their mother this way? Because there comes a point in time where boys get bigger than their mom, and their mom should not have to rely on her personal ferocity to influence her sons. She ought to be able to rely on the fact that they hold her in awe and reverence, and they want to do right by her, and they want to yield to her, they want to support her, and they've been trained how to do that. So, okay, this is the nut that I got from a blind squirrel 40 years ago. Comments, suggestions, something I left out, something I didn't relate to you? I suggest that you consider it anyway, okay? And because I think it's, I have found it to be quite quite useful. I think it's the means that God has given His children to, in a very humble way, influence those who have unassailable authority in our lives without challenging them, without defying them, and without them feeling that we're attempting to undermine them. Okay? Lord bless you.
Very well said, John. Very well said.
Okay, I think we got him.
Yeah.
Did-